All right, let's dive in. Today, we are cracking the code on what is, for many people, the very heart of the LSAT, logical reasoning. Look, to master this test, you've got to master the art of the argument. So we're going to break down exactly how the test thinks, and more importantly, how you can think one step ahead. Let's get to it.
So, that's the big question, isn't it? How do you go from looking at this dense paragraph of text to, in just a few seconds, seeing its logical skeleton? That is the absolute core skill we're building today. And believe me, it's not magic. It's a solid, repeatable method that you can use on any argument the LSAT throws at you.
So here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the absolute foundation, the argument's core. Then, we'll get proactive with strategies to strengthen and weaken arguments. After that, we'll learn to spot the test's most common traps, identify those pesky logical flaws, and finally, we'll put it all together and see it in action. First up, the argument core. Seriously, think of this as the foundation of your entire LSAT house. If this part is weak, everything else you try to build on top of it is just going to crumble. Every single question comes back to mastering this. So what is the argument core, really? Well, it's made of two things you can see. The conclusion, that's what the author wants you to believe, and the premises, which is just the evidence they give you. But here's the secret. The LSAT doesn't really test the evidence. It tests the invisible logical leap between the evidence and the conclusion. That gap, that's where pretty much every single question lives.
Finding this core is a step-by-step process. First, you got to hunt down that conclusion, the main point. Second, you identify the premises, the support structure. Third, and this is crucial, you have to scrutinize the link between them. Ask yourself, does this evidence really prove that conclusion, or is there a gap? And for the really tough ones, yeah, you can diagram it. But the golden rule is step 5. Always, always, always keep your eyes locked on the conclusion.
And here's why that's so important. This quote exposes a critical LSAT trap. The test makers are smart. They know you just read the premises, so they'll offer you these really tempting wrong answers that just repeat or reinforce that evidence. But your job isn't to agree with the evidence, it's to evaluate if it proves the ultimate claim. Spotting this little trick saves you from the most common wrong answers out there. Okay, so now that we can dissect an argument, let's level up. The next skill is about anticipating the answer before you even look at the options. It's a technique called pre-phrasing, and honestly, it is an absolute game changer.
Pre-phrasing is basically like forming a hypothesis before you look at the data. For a strengthened question, you ask yourself, okay, what new facts would make this conclusion more believable? For a weakened question, it's the opposite. What would blow a hole in this logic? But here's the key. You have to be specific. Don't just think vaguely, oh, I need new evidence. No, think something concrete, like, I'm looking for an answer that rules out some other possible cause. This turns you from a passive reader into an active hunter for the right answer.
Now for the defensive game. You have to understand the LSAT isn't just a logic puzzle. It's a minefield of really well-designed traps. Just knowing what they look like is half the battle. This slide is gold. It perfectly contrasts the right path from all the wrong ones. Correct answers always have a direct impact on the conclusion. Trap answers, on the other hand, are designed to distract you. They might attack the premises, which you're actually supposed to accept as true, or they'll throw in irrelevant info that sounds kind of important but logically does nothing. And you have to watch out for extreme language like all or never. Those words are huge red flags because they are so hard to prove.
This leads us perfectly into our next topic, identifying logical flaws. A huge chunk of the logical reasoning section is just asking you to do one thing: find the error, find the mistake in the author's thinking.
Now the good news is the LSAT is really predictable. It just recycles the same handful of logical flaws over and over again. So this table is kind of like a cheat sheet. Take correlation versus causation. This is a big one. Just because two things happen together doesn't mean one causes the other. The test loves this flaw. Or the straw man, where you twist an argument to make it easier to attack. Once you can name these patterns, you start to see them everywhere. So how do you actively hunt for these things? Well, here's your checklist. Trace the logic from the premise to the conclusion and just see where it feels weak. Look for sneaky shifts in wording. But probably the most powerful thing you can do is always ask yourself, could there be another explanation for this evidence? Just asking that one question will expose the flaw in a huge number of LSAT problems.
All right, that's enough theory. The absolute best way to understand these concepts is to see them in action. So let's walk through a classic example together.
Okay, here's a simple, classic argument. Every time I wash my car, it rains the next day. Clearly, washing my car causes it to rain. Now, as you read that, start breaking it down. What's the conclusion? What's the evidence? And where's that absurd logical leap happening?
Okay, so the question is, which of these best describes the flaw? But hang on, before we even look at the choices, let's pre-phrase. The author sees two things happening together, washing the car and the rain, and just jumps to the conclusion that one causes the other. So we're looking for an answer choice that describes that specific error.
And there it is. B. It perfectly describes the flaw using the exact terminology we saw earlier. It confuses a correlation with a causal relationship. This is a textbook, classic example of that fallacy. When you see the pattern, you can pick the answer with total confidence.
So, what's the biggest thing to take away from all this? It's this. The LSAT isn't just a puzzle you need to solve. It's a series of landmines you have to avoid. Success in logical reasoning is just as much about defensive thinking and spotting traps as it is about straightforward problem solving.
So we'll end with this question for you. Now that you have the blueprint for taking apart arguments, how is that going to change the way you read, the way you listen, and the way you think, not just on test day, but every day? Thanks for joining this breakdown of LSAT logical reasoning.